Check. 1, 2. 1, 2. Faint. One, two. 1, 2. SABC test. 1, 2. Is it soft? 1, 2.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ijonye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Morning, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may begin, today we have the evidence of Ms. Williams. There are a few housekeeping matters I'd like to deal with, if I may, with your leave, before we swear the witness in. The first is just in relation to the bundle of Ms. Williams's evidence. With your leave, Chair, I propose that we number it F1 in the sequence.
Okay. It will be marked F1.
Ms. Williams, as I make reference to the bundle, I will on occasion call it F1 for the purposes of the record, and so you know that is the bundle in front of you that you should make reference to. Chair, the second housekeeping matter is that there is one document which has been omitted from the bundle, which I've taken the bold move of paginating for the Chair in the interests of efficiency.
Yes.
I've proposed that it be paginated 39.1 and 39.2, because that will ensure that it inserts in the correct place in the chronology. If I may beg leave to hand that up.
Thank you.
My learned colleagues should have copies of the bundle themselves and then that additional document, which will be inserted between the existing pages 39 and 40 of the bundle.
Has that been done to the witnesses bundle?
It has indeed, Chair.
Thank you. It will come after page 40.
After page 39, Chair.
Well, the page that has got page 39 has something on both sides. So the one side is page 39, the other one is page 40.
Chair, there were two copies of the bundle prepared.
Yeah.
The copy that went to you yesterday should have been not double-sided,
Oh.
and so could have been inserted between the two. The one that has subsequently been prepared for this morning is double-sided. Maybe I can make an arrangement with your registrar
Yes.
to give you the copy that is not double-sided, as it will aid your movement
Yes.
through the papers today.
Okay, all right, for now I will keep this. I won't put this in, this 39.1 and 39.2, but when you refer me to it, I will have regard to it.
Thank you, Chair. I expect I won't get to it before tea, and so maybe at tea we can make the arrangement for
all
you.
right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
The second housekeeping matter is just in relation to the notices to implicated persons arising from Ms. Williams's evidence. Chair, I can confirm to you that those notices were sent timeously, and that as matters currently stand, there have been no applications received in relation to Ms. Williams's evidence flowing
Yes.
from those notices.
Yes.
The only thing that we have received was a request from Mr. Manyi, who was one of the implicated persons, to attend today and be accredited, and that was facilitated yesterday.
Well, I don't know what it means to be accredited.
Yes, indeed.
I know that he or anybody else may attend,
Indeed,
but that might be of no significance for now.
No, indeed, Chair.
Okay.
Just simply to keep you up to date on where that process is. Chair, those are the housekeeping matters. If I may then request the witness
Yes.
to be sworn in.
Yeah. Please swear the witness in.
Morning.
Morning.
Please state your full names for the record.
I'm Miriam Phumla Williams.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I have no objection.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Certainly.
If so, and if you swear that the evidence you shall give today shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, please raise your right hand and say, I do.
I do.
I'm not sure that that oath was properly said. Please just say it again. Have you got the written thing. Okay, come over this side. I'm sorry, Ms. Williams. The registrar will just administer the oath afresh to you.
Do you swear that the evidence you shall give today shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I swear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, I made reference to the bundle in front of you, which will be referred to as Exhibit F1 in the course of the proceedings. May I ask you to turn up page 1 of that document? The first 2 pages are simply an index, and then following that are the paginated pages of the bundle. Ms. Williams, you'll see at page 1 is a document entitled Witness Statement for Ms. Phumla Williams, and it runs from page 1 to page 11. Can you confirm that that is your witness statement?
Yes, Chair, I can confirm.
And can you confirm that the contents of that statement are true?
Yes, I can confirm.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, what I propose to do is to follow the sequence of your statement in the course of your evidence this morning. I don't propose to ask you to read from it. On occasion I might, where there is some significance. But in general, we would like you to tell us your story, not based on the written word, but on the events as you recount them. If I may then begin, what is your current position?
I'm currently the Acting Director General of GCIS.
And when did you first enter government?
I joined government in 1994 in the provincial office in Gauteng.
And thereafter, can you give us a sense of your passage through government since that date of 1994?
In 1994, I joined government as an administrator, and subsequently I got promoted to an assistant director, and I was then later promoted to deputy director, which all those ranks I did whilst I was in Gauteng province. And subsequently I got a post as a director of finance in the GCIS. That was in 1998. And subsequently I was promoted to a chief financial officer in the GCIS. And in 2009, I was then appointed as a Deputy Director General. At the time, it was called the Deputy CEO.
Was that also of GCIS?
Of GCIS, yes, Chair.
Ms. Williams, could we just pause a moment about GCIS? We heard testimony yesterday from Mr. Maseko, who was there as the CEO until early 2011. Can you tell the Chair about GCIS? What is it as an institution in the state?
Thank you very much, Chair. The Government Communication Information System, I'll start with the information part, because it draws its mandate from the report that was done by a group of experts which were commissioned by the President, and one of the first area of the GCIS is information. And I remember when I joined, one of the first things that we have had to do is to address the information deficit, particularly to the vulnerable communities. I remember, Chair, that one of the first things that we did was to employ what we called GIC, which is Government Information Officers. With that mandate, we were able to unearth adults who have never had a birth certificate. We were able to unearth adults who didn't even see a need to have an ID. And with our information officers in the rural areas, we were traversing throughout the rural areas, trying to uncover some of those South Africans, and in particular, kids that were even in looking after cattle because the parents didn't see a need for school. And we have had to do that, and we drove the Tusong public multi-purpose centers because we have had to do this job together with the relevant departments. I think the credit goes also to Home Affairs, who had those mobile trucks and were able to go to those communities and try and educate them the need to register. In fact, not only to educate, but to also make sure that they do benefit from registering birth certificate and also having ID. We were able to uncover people who have ended up in rural areas who were injured whilst they were working in the big cities, and they didn't know what exactly is expected when you are injured at work. And that's some of the work that we were doing. And I think if I can move, maybe summarize, I think probably before I move on to the other, Chair, one of the things that we have had to do with the government information officers is to begin to demystify what is the purpose of a budget vote, what is the purpose of a state of the nation. We have had to hire big screens in those rural areas. And at those days, I think the state of the nation was during the day. We have had to do that. If I move, Chairperson, to the communication, I think maybe the last parting point on interfacing with communities, the Cabinet, I think in 2004, gave us the mandate to do a publication, a newspaper, if I may say, a newspaper called Vukuzenzele in all the languages, because we had uncovered that there was a need to also have that kind of a product that is meant for communities in those areas. To this day, that publication is there. When we started it, Chairperson, it was once every 2 months. And it was also coming up in a format of a braille, also to accommodate the disabled, those who were not able to process the print word. And we were able to do that, and it started as a 2 months, but now it's fortnightly. What is pleasing, Chairperson, is that it is produced by journalists within those communities, and they then talk that whole product that interfaces also with government. And that's what GCIS still does today. The second area, Chairperson, of the GCIS is around communication. My understanding of GCIS Director General, the Director General serves as the face of government. He or she sits in cabinet, communicates the decisions that come from cabinet. The Director General in GCIS also manages the messaging of government and coordinates, because I think the GCIS is a system that coordinates the messaging of government. The GCIS Director General ensures that there is that coherence of the messaging. The view that the COM task was having in mind is that when you are working as a government communicator, irrespective of whether you are in health or what, members of the public would expect you to know. And I think what we seek to do with the coordination is that even if you work in arts, at least you should know what government's position is on health matters. So that coordination and getting all those communicators in those departments, they have to have a sense. Yes, there is an acknowledgement that the health are the experts, they keep the content, but on a high level, GCIS's role is to coordinate and make sure that that messaging is happening. And the last area of the Director General is also around communicating the issues that cut across. If it is a matter that involves more than 1 or 2 departments, government voice is driven from the GCIS. And Chairperson, if I may also say the production side of the GCIS. The GCIS is responsible for the corporate identity, the look and feel of government. If I can then remember that the current coat of arms of government was commissioned through the GCIS. the current look and feel of all the government departments, they were commissioned from the GCIS. And lastly, Chair, we are responsible for archiving, and most probably even some of the stuff that is coming here will end up being archived through the GCIS. We archive the video footages, we archive the photographic material, we archive any material that is of historic significance, particularly for government. We collaborate with the National Archives to package and keep it, and we have the material dating far back as even before our time, because we inherited it from the South African Communication Service. And lastly, Chairperson, we are responsible for the media buying on behalf of other departments.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams, at paragraph 2 of your statement, at page 1, in the second sentence, you refer to, well, with reference to the first, that you were later appointed in 2002 as the GCIS Chief Financial Officer. And then you state that the accounting officer at the time was Mr. Joel Netsitenze and later Mr. Temba Maseko. I think it's uncontentious, but I'd like your confirmation on this, that the accounting officer is the Director General position that you've been referring to in your evidence to the Chair.
Certainly, Chair, the Directors General that I have served under at that time was Mr. Joel Netsitenze, who was the director, the first Director General of the GCIS, and subsequently Mr. Temba Maseko, who was the Director General at that time.
Ms. Williams, can you tell us about their leadership of GCIS and what it was like serving under them?
Chairperson, these are the Directors General that I would credit my knowledge of what it is about. Mr. Netsitenze was the most ethical and credible Director General because at that time I was a CFO. Mr. Temba Maseko, I was already a DJ. But I have memories when I got to GCIS, there were no systems. We had to put together the systems. We had to struggle along. And Mr. Netsitenze was incredibly useful in saying how we should deal with some of the issues. And I think in this case, I would like to also give credit to the Auditor General. I think the Auditor General has held our hand. I think, as I recall, when I joined GCIS, there was no clean audit. But with the leadership that we received from the these two Directors General, together with the Auditor General, we have been able to get a clean audit as a department.
Ms. Williams, in paragraph 4 of your statement, also at page 1, you are referencing the GCIS and in light of the description you've just given to the Chair, you conclude with the statement, it was to be a communication system that was to give effect to the constitutional right of access to information. Can you explain to us how it was supposed to achieve that?
Chair, what I indicated in my opening remarks is having the presence in the most rural of areas, because I think we did realize the most important and vulnerable people where we have found that there's an information deficit is in the very poor. And that, to us, talked to the constitutional mandate that we have, that we need to ensure that South Africans have access to information. Yes, the urban areas, we were servicing them through the mainstream media, which I didn't mention that we have a full division of the mainstream media. But I think the areas that we have had to service are in rural areas. And we have 9 provincial offices, but not only that, we've got districts where our communicators, and I think, Chairperson, I should also indicate, one of the things that was key to us is that when we hired these information officers, they must come from those communities. We invested in training them and to make sure that they understand the dynamics, and we educated them about the policies of government, and that's how we were then tackling the issue of information that should empower those communities.
Ms. Williams, you ended your original discussion of the role of GCIS with reference to media buying. I'd like to focus on that in a bit more detail with you because it's key to some of the remainder of your testimony. What is media bulk buying for government? Can you explain that concept to us?
Chairperson, the media bulk buying also emanates from the Comtas report. One of the first tasks that we have had to do is to pull together all the government media spend and consolidate it so that we can derive the economies of scale. And when we started with that, that was in 1998, because we didn't have an internal capacity, we outsourced that service, and we were doing that through the bid process. And I remember those days, the bid process was still done at National Treasury. We were advising on the tender, and we're appointing companies which were then doing the media buying on behalf. But departments essentially would brief us, and then in turn we would brief the company that we have commissioned through the bid process. And later we then had to do it in-house, that is 2010.
Ms. Williams, if I may take you to that place in your statement, it is over the page at page 2. As I understand your evidence, up to the period of 2010, there was a bid process in respect of which a media agency would be appointed, and that agency would make the selection from the various media platforms of where to place the government advertisements. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then if you go to paragraph 7 on page 2, you say there, in August 2010, when the last agency contract expired, GCIS moved the function in-house so that media buying would now be run from capacity within GCIS. Can you give us insight as to the reason for that change?
Chairperson, the system that we had in the GCIS, any contract, when it expires, we review it. In fact, we review it 6 months before. And one of the things that we had picked up at that point was that we were not living to the mandate that was given to us, deriving the economies of scale. For instance, when we were doing it with the agencies, we would have to pay the handling fees from the agency, which was, I think at the time, 16%. They were charging, sharing with us the discount which they were deriving. And at that point, we felt that it's a saving that we could be plowing back to the state. We rather invest in doing it in-house, and we then worked towards when it expires, we will not renew it, we will do it in-house, and that would have enabled the state to save that 16.5% discount, handling fees from agencies. It would have ensured that the negotiated discounts with the media houses is plowed back into the state, and that was the main reason for us to bring it back in-house.
Ms. Williams, could you give us a sense of how the procurement process of media buying worked after the change in August 2010, when you moved the media buying function in-house? Take us step by step, if you will, and for the edification of the chair, how that media buying worked from that point onwards.
Chairperson, one of the things that we have had to manage, because the procurement, as it's defined in the National Treasury, did not have provision for media buying. For example, if you want to place an advert in Sowetan, the 3 quotation was not going to work for us. So we have had to engage with National Treasury to say, we are going to save the state. The tool that exists, it doesn't allow us to do that. And we were then given the permission to use a special delegation 16.4, which was the basis of what we were doing. How we were then performing, Chairperson, is that we would receive a written request from the department. It then comes to GCIS. We had invested in the software which media agencies were using anyway themselves. We then invested in buying it. That software, Chairperson, allows you to know which is the best platform to use to place that advert. So what we were then doing, we would take the request, the brief from the client, we will then populate it into the system, the software which was called Telma, and on the basis of that, we will then derive what exactly are the best platforms to be used. And we then cost them, and we send it back to the client, and the client signs it off, and then they transfer the money. And we then had to deal with the compliance of National Treasury. One of the important things with the delegations that we were using, which if I can just summarize it, is it's an emergency delegation. The requirement is that the section has to write a motivation why they have chosen that particular platform and why they think that it's a cost-effective platform. And on the basis of that, the supplier chain would then effect the transaction.
Ms. Williams, you made reference to the choice of the best platform to answer the brief that you received from the departments. I'd like to ask two questions in relation to that. First of all, the departments. Which are those departments? Were they national, provincial, or were they confined?
Chairperson, I think at the beginning, in fact, even up to now, we still confine ourselves to national for a simple reason that our view is that we can create capacity within the provinces so that the economy of those provinces can, so that when we then do the procurement, we don't do it on behalf of the provinces. There will be exceptions there and there, but in the main, we service all the national departments.
And then the second question, what informs the choice of the best platform to meet the needs of the brief that you receive from the national department?
Chairperson, I did indicate that the brief normally directs the media buyers to populate in the software, and the software would then say, if you want the audience that is in Nongoma, this is the publication that you should use. If you need a community in Soweto, this is what we would propose. It proposes a whole suite of platforms that you need to use, and we then send it back to the client. And I should indicate the client signs it off. At times it may not, but I think most of the time they would sign it off.
Ms. Williams, we heard evidence yesterday from Mr. Maseko that key to this selection of the appropriate media platform was consideration of the message that the National Department wanted to convey and then the target audience that they wanted to reach. Would you agree with that summary?
Certainly, I would agree with that. That's why I was even saying that in Nongoma, the software will tell us this is the audience and this is the kind of a publication you would use.
Ms. Williams, at paragraph 8 on page 2, you move to another aspect of the procurement processes within GCIS. What you say there is that as head of corporate services, you were appointed as the chairperson of the Bid Adjudication Committee. Can you tell us about the function of the Bid Adjudication Committee within GCIS?
Chairperson, the process, I think I should also take a step back that previously all departments were depending on National Treasury, what we used to call State Tender Board. And they then decided to devolve that function. They provided what we call a circular that guides how a bid committee should be put together and what it should be doing. The composition of the GCIS bid committee at the time was guided by the circular from National Treasury that firstly, it must have a CFO for starters, it must have senior people within the organization, it must have a cross-functional representation of the department. The bid committee, that's how it was formed. The one that I'm talking to is the one that was formed aligned to how National Treasury wanted it. What it was doing, firstly, we were processing the submissions for the bid that had gone out and then processed through the evaluation committee, and we would receive submissions from the chair of the evaluation committee. That's one function. The second function that we were responsible for is to deal with any material deviation, maybe a compliance issue, a section didn't get 3 quotation or whatever. We insisted that we wanted them to be tabled in the bid committee. And third function, Chair, is we would receive reports on the progress of the contracts that we've already awarded. And I think if I have to say, this is when we took the decision that we need to bring it in-house, because the sections, supplier chain will come, brief us on the process of what the contract was. In some cases, they would tell us that, you know, the company is not delivering what it had said to deliver. Then we would give instructions to say, go and engage them, write to them and whatever. And lastly, I think we would also receive reports even on those thresholds that do not strictly fall within the bid committee. For instance, transactions that happen within 30,000 to 500,000, they don't necessarily belong to the bid committee, but we would insist that once a month we are given that kind of a transaction for a simple reason that we wanted to have a sense of where the budget is going in terms of small upcoming companies. We wanted to have a handle of that. So that's basically what the bid committee was doing.
Thank you. If I may then ask you to refer to page 3 of your statement. Page 3 of the statement begins from paragraph 9, and the following paragraphs deal with an event in or about January 2011, which for convenience purposes I will refer to as the removal of Mr. Maseko as the CEO of GCIS at the time. Can we begin at paragraph 9? You say, in or about January 2011. Now, Ms. Williams, you wouldn't have had the benefit of Mr. Maseko's evidence yesterday, but in the course of his evidence, he indicated to the chair that he was able, with reference to some of his diaries, to establish that his removal had actually taken place in February 2011. You talk about on or about January 2011. Are you satisfied with the date of February 2011 for Mr. Maseko's removal?
Sorry, Chair, I missed the question.
Of course.
The question is that is whether you are comfortable to talk on the basis that Mr. Maseko's removal happened in February. Council is asking you that in the context of the fact that in your statement you say on or about January 2011 is when he was removed. So she's asking you whether, she says Mr. Maseko said it happened in February after looking, I think, at his diary, and council wants to find out whether you would be comfortable to say it happened in February or whether you'd say it's January.
Chairperson, the reason I said it was around January is because I remember very clearly that Mr. Maseko came in that morning and he was meant to go to the World Economic Forum, which was meant to be around the 25th. It was towards the end of and he said to me, I'm no longer going. That was after she had briefed the staff, and she says, Phumla, can you take over and attend that World Economic Forum? So I know I did attend the World Economic Forum on behalf of Mr. Maseko.
Maybe I can just say, Ms. Hofmeyer, that I also may be wrong, but my recollection was that Mr. Maseko spoke about him having been removed in January. I think towards the end of January. But he did say at some stage during his evidence that he wished he could have access to, I think, his diaries, which would help him. I don't know whether it was in regard to that or in regard to other dates. But if he did say February, I might have missed that part as well.
Indeed, Chair. If, with the Chair's leave, we will confirm the record of the transcript over the break. As I have it, there were references to a conversation with Minister Chabani that took place on the 30th and the 31st of January, but we will confirm that for the purposes of a follow-up question with Ms. Williams.
Well, I do seem also to remember the 31st of January being mentioned. But
Indeed.
That's fine. You will check and
We
then
will
you
check
will
the
let
transcript.
us know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's move to those events, Ms. Williams, early in 2011. You mentioned Mr. Maseko coming to you with an announcement about his removal. Can you tell us about how that happened?
Chairperson, I recall, because I recall it because Mr. Maseko's office was next to mine. And I remember him coming into my office and saying that, could you please facilitate the staff, the management meeting? And he didn't say what it was. He just simply says, can you quickly arrange the management meeting, which I did. And he said that they should come to my boardroom. And we all went into his boardroom. And in that meeting, it was a very brief meeting, only to tell us that he was leaving. And obviously, all of us were shocked because I think we didn't see it coming. And we said, but why? And she said that I'm being transferred to the DPSA. And, you know, she couldn't offer any more explanation despite all of us in the boardroom almost shocked. And then she was just saying, thank you very much. And then she was dismissed. So we all dismissed. But because I was next to his office, I just thought, let me go and find out, because it just didn't make sense. And I remember when I got into his office and I found him bending the head on the desk, and I could see that he's not going to speak to me. And I left, and I came back to the office because I could see that. And the next, she then came out, and on his way out, because I think what then transpired is that his staff started packing his stuff in the office. And then on his way out, he came into my office and he said that I am going to call off that process of buying a house because I was responsible for the human resources, and obviously when you're buying a house as a public servant, there are some forms that you complete. And he had already started that process, and he said, Phumla, I'm going to call it off. It's not going to happen. And he left, and that was the last we saw Mr. Maseko on that day.
Were there any advertisements to fill his post that preceded his removal?
Chairperson, I don't remember an advert. In fact, on the same day that Mr. Maseko left, Mr. Mzwanele, or Jimmy, at that time we called Jimmy, Mr. Mzwanele Manyi came and arrived, and I remember him asking me to call a staff meeting because he's now the new Director General. And we then organized that staff meeting.
Ms. Williams, do you know what Mr. Manyi was doing before he joined GCIS?
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. I'm sorry.
Chair. Apologies.
Just before that question, around what time was it, do you think, when Mr. Maseko left the building or left the department?
Chairperson, it was on that same day. He arrived in the morning. I would have to check the exact date because I think we can check that. It was on that same day when he called the staff meeting, packed, the staff assisted to pack the things, left. The moment he left, we then got to be told that Mr. Manyi was at the basement in our building. And he came up, and then she then requested to say, she actually introduced himself, which is something that is unusual because we generally are used to people we are told well in advance, but he came on that same day, and he said to us, we must call a staff meeting. He wants to introduce himself as the new Director General of GCIS.
Oh, well, you have almost answered the next question. I wanted to see how much time lapsed between Mr. Maseko's departure and Mr. Manyi's arrival. But from what you are saying,
Same
it's
day.
like quite immediate.
Yes, Chairperson.
Within an hour, maybe? Within 2 hours?
I think I would be lying, but I think the spacing was so short because the meeting didn't even take long, and the packing. If I recall, I don't even think everything of Mr. Maseko was taken. It was almost like the few personal things that were taken, and that same day, I think I would even say 2 hours or so, but I would have to verify that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Williams, I asked you about Mr. Manyi and whether you had any knowledge of from whence he came when he arrived at GCS at the beginning of 2011. Do you know whether he was serving in government at the time, what his position was?
Chairperson, when Mr. Manyi came, he was a transfer. I believe he was the Director General of the Department of Labor.
Do you know whether he was serving in that capacity at the time?
He was serving as the Director General of the Department of Labor.
Ms. Williams, at the bottom of page 3, paragraph 13, you say that Mr. Manyi arrived and introduced a number of changes in the organization. And then if you turn over the page, those changes begin to be referenced from paragraph 14. Before we move to those changes, I'd like to ask you to move to page 75 of your bundle, because the speed with which this change between Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi took place appears not to be in compliance with the relevant regulatory requirements that exist within the Act and the regulations. And so I'd like to take you to some of those sections for the purposes of placing this event in its proper context. If we begin at page 75, Ms. Williams, that is a section of the Public Services Act which begins at page 62 of the bundle, just to orientate you. And at page 75 of the bundle, you will see the issue of appointments of heads of department and career incidents is dealt with. What this section does, in summary, and then I will go to the text, is it identifies who is responsible for appointing the heads of department of the various state departments. And just to clarify that GCIS is one such state department, if you would turn to page 86 of the bundle, you will see 2/3 down the page a heading Schedule 1, National Departments and Offices of Premier and Heads thereof. And if you turn over the page to page 87, you will see almost 4/5 of the way down, the Government Communication and Information System is listed as a national department under Schedule 1 in the left-hand column, and in the right-hand column, the head of that department is signified as the Director General of what we are now colloquially referring to as GCIS. Do you see that?
Yes.
So if we can go back to section 12, that was just to confirm for us that when section 12 is talking about heads of department, it is indeed referring within its domain to GCIS. Now 12.1 says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in this act, but subject to 2 sections that aren't pertinent for present purposes, the appointment and other career incidents of the heads of department and government component shall be dealt with in the case of a head of a national department or national government component by the President. Is that consistent with your understanding of how the DG of GCIS is appointed?
Certainly, the appointment of the Directors General is done by the President of the country.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Ms.
Indeed,
Hofmeyr.
Chair.
Do you know whether that was the position as well as around 2010, 2011? In other words, was that the position at that time as well? I'm just asking that question because the evidence given by Mr. Maseko, I leave out the question of appointment, was that the contract that would be signed by a DG would be a contract between the DG, that person who will be DG, and the minister responsible for the department, if I recall correctly. So I just want you to be able to say whether your understanding is that this position also obtained at that time or not?
Chairperson, yes, my understanding is that the appointment of Directors General is the President. The performance contract is signed by the Director General together with the relevant minister.
So the contract that is signed,
yes,
is called a performance contract.
Yes.
Do you know whether it would contain essentially all or most of the terms and conditions that one would expect in a normal contract of employment?
I would imagine, Chairperson, but what I can confirm is that the performance contract does spell out the areas that should be the focus of the Director General.
Yeah.
But the letter that should have the contract itself, I will not be able to ascertain exactly what it says.
And normally would the performance contract be concluded after the appointment of the person by the President?
Certainly, Chairperson.
So you could be appointed by the President, and for a certain period you don't have a performance contract until one has been concluded between your minister and yourself as a DG.
My understanding, Chairperson, in fact, it goes with almost all the public servants. When you are appointed,
yes,
you will get your letter, which in the case of the Director General, they will get that letter from the President. Within 3 months, they must have completed that performance contract.
Okay.
They are normally given 3 months.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I may, I just, in the light of your questions, direct you to a few further sections of the bundle. The first that is, well, before I do that, Chair, your question about whether this same position applied in 2011 can be answered with reference. We are dealing with the Public Service Act. You would have seen at page 62, which is an amended version from about 2014. In anticipation of today, I have searched the government gazettes, which I'm wont to do, and established for the Chair that the operative section 12, to which we have made reference, was introduced in an amendment act, Act 30 of 2007.
Okay.
So it preceded the dates that are pertinent,
Yes.
and that was the amendment that introduced this very section 12 that we are making reference to.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Chair, and then in addition, this question about the contract. Attached as an annexure to the Public Service Act is actually the standard form agreement that will be executed between heads of department appointed under Section 12. But it anticipates that the contract is signed, notwithstanding the appointment by the President, with the executive authority who is the Minister.
Yes.
And if I can just draw the Chair's attention to that contract, the standard form contract appears at page 202 of the bundle. What you will see at page 202 is that it is a contract prescribed in terms of Section 12 of the Public Service Act 1994 for heads of department. That was the section we were looking at moments ago. And it specifies that it's entered into between the government of the Republic of South Africa, herein represented by, a space is left, and in the brackets appears full name of executive authority or his or her delegate, Chair, to avoid the cumbersome backwards and forwards in the papers, I can confirm for you that at page 65 of the bundle, executive authority is defined, and it is defined as the relevant minister. So that should tie up the regulatory scheme in which these appointments take place.
Yes.
Ms. Williams, we were at page 75, and we were dealing with what Section 12 of the Public Service Act says about the appointments of heads of department. That was in subsection 1, but I'd like us also to look, if we may, at subsection 3A. That is also on page 75. You will see there that the legislation provides that the President may transfer the head of a national department or national government component before or at the expiry of his term or extended term to perform functions in a similar or any other capacity in a national department or national government component in a post of equal, higher or lower grading or additional to the establishment as the President considers appropriate. So section 12 sub 3 is dealing with transfers of heads of department. What I've read there is subsection 3A. If we turn over the page to 76, you will see that the manner in which that transfer must take place is also prescribed. At D on page 76, it says a transfer in terms of this subsection may only occur if one of two things happen. The first is that the relevant head of department consents to the transfer, or secondly, after due consideration of any representations by the head, the transfer is in the public interest. Is that consistent with your experience of transfers in the government service?
I will speak with the lower ranks. It's very consistent. The transfers, there's got to be some kind of engagement with the officials. We generally would not just transfer, wake up one morning and we say to the staff, normally there is an engagement, and I would imagine, Chair, it should have been the case also with the Directors General.
In your experience, are you aware of any such rapid replacement previously in the history of GCIS, that a DG would be removed on the morning of one day and replaced by someone the same day?
Chairperson, I've never seen it. I was in public service from 1994. It was the first time I saw it.
And what was the impact of the rapidity of that change on GCIS?
Chairperson, it was massive. The level of demoralization in an organization that had a Director General who was accessible to the lowest of an organization, a cleaner was accessible, a deputy director was accessible, and it was completely a culture shock. Within a day, and we find ourselves head spinning, trying to make sense, and nobody was willing to give us an explanation of what this was all about. It did impact on the morale of the staff.
Are you aware whether there was any changeover that took place between Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi?
Chairperson, I think there were quite a number of changes that were also not consistent with the culture of our organization.
I'm sorry. Did you mean hand
I
over?
I meant hand over, indeed.
You said change
I was
over.
running ahead of myself for the changes that Mr. Manyi introduced. Ms. Williams, the force of my question was, were you aware of any handover to ensure consistency in the transition between Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi?
Chairperson, I'm not aware of any. They might have had it as one-on-one over a cup of coffee, but we are not aware of that kind of a handover that could have happened in the department.
I would then like to move to the topic of changes, if I may. And those commence, Ms. Williams, at page 4 of your statement. Ms. Williams, from paragraph 14 on that page to paragraph 16 at the bottom, you talk about a series of changes that were introduced after Mr. Manyi took up the position of DG of GCIS. Rather than have you read, I propose to you that they're grouped into two topics. The first of those relate to the Bid Adjudication Committee and the changes he implemented there. Would you please take the chair through what those changes involved?
Chairperson, the first change, particularly as it affects my area, I was the chairperson, and I think I should also indicate I had been appointed by him, Mr. Manye. I think in my letter I'm stating that it was June 2011, which is consistent with how we normally do it in the GCIS. On an annual basis, we review and we reappoint, and I was being reappointed basically, and I was at the time she was already in the department, appointed me as the chairperson of the bid committee, and obviously with all the members as they existed at the time. I think it was 3-4 months later, she then we woke up one morning and we were told that she has changed the bid committee and appointed a completely new people with no CFO, which is what National Treasury recommends. And she appointed, if I may say, it was Mr. Michael Curran.
Ms. Williams, sorry to interrupt. If I may, we'll go to that part in the statement in a moment. But you did make reference to your letter of appointment. Could we go there just in the sequence? You'll see it appears at page 12 of the bundle. As I understand the testimony you've just given, you confirmed that in June 2011, Mr. Manye reappointed you in the position of chair of the Bid Adjudication Committee. If you look at page 12 of the bundle, and over the page at 13, you will see that that is a letter signed by Mr. Manye as the Chief Executive Officer, as I understand he was referred to at the time, and the date there is the second two digits on the printed copy, Chair and Ms. Williams, looks like it might be a 01. But I can assure you from the electronic copy, which is clearer, it is the 6th of June, and it must be because Mr. Manye was not in GCIS on the 3rd of January, nor do I think people would have been doing such matters on the 3rd of January in 2011. Nonetheless, if we turn back over the page, what this is, if you read under paragraph 1, is your formal appointment as the Bid Adjudication Committee chairperson in terms of the PFMA, as well as the Treasury regulations. If you go down to paragraph 3, could you please read into the record that first paragraph under 3?
In pursuit of the vision of government communication, in brackets GCIS, in becoming a leading organization in financial management in public finance, it is imperative that competent and committed officers are appointed.
And then if you move over the page, at page 13, there are a list of functions of the Bid Adjudication Committee listed there. Would you please take us through those functions?
I think the first one, should I read as written or should I just talk to?
Talk to them, indeed.
Okay. The bid committee's functions, chairperson in the main, is to process submissions of bids that had been processed through the evaluation committee. They then get presented to the bid adjudication committee. We deliberate on them. We check whether they have been consistent with the terms of reference, whether the scoring is correct, whether the company will address what we are trying to cure with procuring those services. And it's basically what the bid adjudication committee does. And I should indicate that the bid committee gets the full bundle of the submissions a week before so that we familiarize ourselves so that we can engage, and that's what in the main we do.
And is there training of the bid committee members to perform those functions?
Chairperson, all of us at that time when the process, we went through a 5 days training from National Treasury, which it took us through what the procurement regulations of government are all about, what the PFMA is all about, how to process a bid submission, how to even calculate the scores, because I think there was that 80-20 and 90-20 for functionality and the weighting. We had to be taken through that whole process, that even when they submit the scoring, we should be able to also double check it ourselves. So we did go through that training for 5 days.
If I may then take you back to your statement at page 4, when I interrupted just so that we could look at that letter of appointment. You were about to tell us about the new members who were appointed to the committee when your committee was disbanded. With reference to paragraph 15, please can you tell us who those new members were and what your knowledge is about what they were doing prior to their appointment to the Bid Adjudication Committee?
Chairperson, the first one was Mr. Michael Karen, who at the time was the chief director responsible for the provincial chapter of the department liaising with the communicators in the provinces. He was appointed as a chairperson. Then there was a Miss Penelope Nduli, who had more or less joined around the same time with Mr. Manyi. She also was from the Department of Labor and moved in with Mr. Manyi to the GCIS. Then there was a Miss Matupe Tusi, who had just been appointed to GCIS as a human resource director. The last one was Miss Zuki Swapoke, who was in the GCIS as a chief director strategic planning. And those were the officials that were appointed by Mr. Manyi.
Had they been
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Chair.
Maybe Council was going to ask you this, but I want to ask you, did that represent a complete replacement of the previous committee which you chaired, or were there some members of the previous committee who remained?
Thanks, Chair. I think all of them were new.
And you mentioned previously the requirement that there not only be the CFO that sits on the Bid Adjudication Committee, but that there be a representativity across the organization. Did the new Bid Adjudication Committee satisfy those requirements?
Chairperson, as I look at the names, there was one section that was not represented. In our bid, we had a representative from the Division of Research, Writing, in that whole program. We had a representation from the provincial stakeholder, Ms. Nebu Lihwabe. We also had a representation from corporate services, and importantly, we had a representation of the CFO, which was how the National Treasury suggested.
And are you aware whether any of these new members went through that training that your previous committee had received?
Chairperson, I'm not aware of any training.
How many of those new members of the committee, as far as you know, came from outside GCIS?
Ms. Matupe was from another department. Ms. Tusi, Ms. Nduli came with Mr. Manye from the Department of Labor, but I think also I should indicate that they had been working together at Tiger Brand. So when Mr. Manye went to Department of Labor, Ms. Nduli moved there. When Mr. Manye moved to GCIS, she moved also with Mr. Manye.
Okay, thank you.
If we may then move to paragraph 16 on page 4. This is where you talk about another change that Mr. Manyi introduced.
Sorry, I didn't get the page.
Page 4, paragraph 16. Just to orientate you, paragraphs 14 and 15 deal with the change to the Bid Adjudication Committee that we've been discussing. And then at paragraph 16, you reference a further change that Mr. Manyi introduced. Can you tell us about that second change?
Yes, Chairperson, during the period of Mr. Maseko and during Mr. Joel Nechitenze, the processing of tenders got completed at a chairperson of the bid adjudication committee. When Minister Manyi came, that changed. It had to be completed by Mr. Manyi.
And Ms. Williams, any further changes that you are aware of that Mr. Manyi introduced over and above the reconstitution of the bid adjudication committee and that processing of submissions going directly to him? Were there any other changes that you'd like to tell the chair about after his entry to GCIS?
Chairperson, additional to this, Mr. Manyi facilitated that the media buying unit must directly report to him. Prior to that, the media buying was at a directorate level, reporting to a chief director. He then moved that unit and suggested that it must report to him directly. Secondly, Mr. Manyi removed the internal audit, which was reporting in my division, and suggested that the internal audit must report to him directly.
Thank you. Who held the position of Chief Director of Media Buying at that time?
Chairperson, I should indicate that in 2010, when we decided to bring it in-house, that division was headed at a director level by a lady who subsequently resigned. And Mr. Manyi then, we advertised the post as we normally do after she resigned. And Mr. Manyi then participated, wanted to chair the interviews. We didn't get a suitable candidate, and she then decided that he will headhunt himself. And yes, he did headhunt Mr. Donald Dipoko, whom we interviewed, and was then appointed at the chief director level to report directly to Mr. Manyi.
At this point, I'd like to spend a moment about the hierarchy within GCIS, because it's going to become relevant in relation to questions I will address to you later. Can you tell us about the hierarchy within GCIS of the positions of Chief Director, Deputy Director General, and Director General? How do they stack up in terms of hierarchy?
Okay. In GCIS, which I probably think it's the same with most of the government department, and unless it's a specialized post, the directors generally report to the chief director. The chief director reports to the DDG, which is the Deputy Director General, and the Deputy Directors General report to the DG.
Thank you. If we can then move over to page 5 of your statement.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Indeed, Chair.
What you have just said now, understood together with what you said earlier in regard to media bulk buying, namely you said Mr. Manyi introduced a change in terms of which media bulk buying would be dealt with by people who would report directly to him. So does this mean that the people who dealt with media bulk buying would have to actually jump over a Deputy Director General that otherwise they were supposed to report to and report directly to the DG?
Chairperson, that's how he had packaged it, but under normal circumstances, that whole process was done through the Chief Director and the DDG of the branch.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I see that we are just before the tea break, and I'm going to move on to a new topic. I'm happy to take the break now with your leave, or proceed and then we can come back. What would be more suitable?
Maybe we should try and use the 5 minutes.
Certainly.
Thank you.
On page 5, Ms. Williams, you begin at paragraph 17 with a reference to the TNA SABC breakfast sessions. And I'd like to explore those in some detail with you. But to begin with, can you explain to us what those breakfast sessions were?
My understanding, Chair, was that the SABC, together with the New Age, they were doing this breakfast. And yeah, that's how much I can say.
And what happened at the breakfasts?
I think, Chairperson, there were various experts normally that were invited. Some ministers were invited, but I remember some of the sports fraternity where they then have this breakfast and round table and they discuss what their policies or the issues were. And I think that's my understanding, that there was just that kind of exchange and sharing of what the matter was, and yeah, in a breakfast.
At paragraph 17, you say, during my tenure as acting DG, I was never involved in any procurements of the TNA SABC breakfast sessions. You go on and say, it has since come to my attention that the supply chain management section, this I assume is of GCIS, may have had dealings with TNA SABC breakfasts. There are a few questions that flow from that statement. Ms. Williams, how did that come to your attention?
Chairperson, it came to my attention after I had been interviewed by the Hawks. And genuinely, because of our delegation, I said there has never been a TNA breakfast in GCIS that we process, because our delegations are very clear. They don't have TNA breakfast. And I said to them, there's never been. And they insisted, and they were adamant, and they were saying that we know that GCIS did do it. Now, when they left, I then took the trouble of going to call the head of procurement. And she confirmed that, yes, that happened, and they were bullied into doing it.
Let us unpack that to some extent. The first thing you said in your answer for the chair was that TNA breakfasts were not within the delegations of GCIS. Can you explain what that means?
Chairperson, the delegations that we had agreed on was for broadcasting, was for print. Nowhere in our delegation did we have breakfasts. And I think that has been the issue by the supplier chain to say, this does not fit into the Telma software which we were using. It falls in within any other roundtable breakfast meetings that are done, and it must follow the normal procurement process. And that's why it never really occurred to me that it would have been done, because the procurement guidelines of our print and broadcasting were very clear. It didn't have breakfasts.
Ms. Hofmeyer, I don't know if I've missed this somewhere. I know what SABC stands for. I don't know TNA. What does it stand for? Maybe the witness can help us.
Indeed. TNA means the New Age. That's the newspaper that was owned by the Guptas.
I would assume NA would be New Age, and T? What, do you know what T would be?
The New Age.
Oh, the New Age. Oh, okay. So it wasn't New Age, it was the New Age.
That's, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You've explained to us that media bulk buying didn't have a delegation to deal with breakfasts. Are you aware of advertising that took place in relation to those breakfasts?
I'm not with you. Just say it again.
Let me rephrase it. As I understand media bulk buying within GCIS, as your testimony has explained, you would receive a brief from a department with a message to go out and a target audience to reach. And your software, the reference you made to Telmar a moment ago, can you confirm, is that the software that is used to identify the media platform to communicate that strategy for the department? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, as I understand your testimony, Telmar is identifying advertising space in order to communicate that message from the national department. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
As I understand it, therefore, media buying is about identifying advertising space for the communication of these messages from national departments. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, Chair.
My question then is, are breakfasts an obvious place where the communication strategies of departments can be advertised?
Chairperson, I think, as I am told by the supplier chain, that was their point of difference, is that their understanding, it doesn't fall within the delegated authority. Their view was that it should go through the normal procurement so that any other media that wants to also pitch in and say, we want to do this round table, they should be afforded that opportunity. It was not a sole service provider, as I had indicated earlier, that the news, Sowetan is Sowetan, you can't get another. But I think the point of supplier chain was that that particular service should have been put to the market and compete with all others who want to run the thing. And that's where the issue was, that they were refusing to do that advertising because supplier chain was saying, take it out to the market and let everybody else pitch who wants to pitch, if you think it is such an effective tool for marketing or advertising.
And what was the purpose of this breakfast? Do you know?
Well, the paperwork that I've seen when they were trying to convince the supplier chain was that it is advertising. And the officials were then saying, but how is breakfast and advertising? And it's at that point that they were told, you are not experts, you are supposed to do it.
So the advertising on the side of TNA, I guess, and SABC, because they were party to it, was it that the advertising that was being done was for the benefit of government departments? Was that what they were saying?
The explanation we were given was that it was meant to advertise. And our argument, or rather the supplier chain's argument, is that if it is TNA, it competes in the software like everybody else. We put the proposal, if the department wants to promote its policies, let's follow the normal processes in the same way that SABC, if it wants to promote and it wants to come with that proposal, let them pitch like everybody else. But I don't think we did have a package that was like TNA and SABC. There wasn't something like that. And it's at that point where they were told that it will happen.
And for that kind of advertising to happen, who would normally have been expected to make the decision whether it should happen or not?
Well, according to the supplier chain, they were told by the CFO that it will happen of the GCIS.
And the CFO at that time was who?
Mr. Zweli Momeko.
Yes. So your understanding is that he made the decision, or he made the decision in regard to some of them?
Yes, because the correspondence that I've seen that is from him, it's the one where he uses words like, you are ahead of yourself, you are not experts, and this has to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, I see we're at the tea
yes.
time. I do have a number of follow-up questions, but with your leave, Chair, I propose dealing with them after the tea break.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll take the tea adjournment now, and we'll resume at 25 to 12.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Come. Kabelo, if you can hear me, you can press record. Do you watch TV? You don't.
Oh, I don't.
Which one? Which one?
I don't.
Camera one. Okay, record.
Oh, all rise.
Thank you, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Chair, before I continue with my questions, I've learned that over the break that we've just had, Ms. Williams has received a communication that I would like to ask if she would share with the Commission.
Thank you.
Chairperson, I got a text message from Mr. Manyi, who is saying that I must say that the TNA breakfast didn't happen in his time, and it is my view that I think she's trying to influence my submission.
Thank you, Ms. Williams, for sharing that with us. The legal team and the investigators must just apply their mind to what the implications are of that text message to the witness and do the necessary.
We will do.
Thank you. Thank you. It's something very serious.
Indeed, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Ms. Williams, for sharing that information with us.
Thanks.
It will be followed up by the legal team and the investigators. It is something very serious.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, before the adjournment, we were dealing with the reports that were made to you by the supply chain management officials in relation to an event of bullying to put advertising spend with the TNA SABC breakfasts. You'll recall that, correct?
Yes, yes.
Ms. Williams, when did this occur?
Chairperson, sorry, the text email that I saw It's dated the 7th of August, 2014.
And who did the bullying?
It's the CFO, which is Mr. Zweli Momeko.
Thank you. I'd like to just unpack how that bullying occurred in the operative systems of GCIS at the time. Ms. Williams, I'm going to go into a bit of detail here, only because these systems are well known to you, but they are not well known to those of us who don't understand the internal workings of GCIS. And it's very important that the extent of the bullying and its nature becomes clear for the evidence before the Commission. Chair.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. It may be prudent, if it has not already been done, that Ms. Williams makes or sends that text message that she has told me about to somebody within the legal team or the investigators, so that even if her cell phone, even if something were to happen to her cell phone, there would be somebody who has the text message.
Indeed, Chair.
Thank you.
We will make sure that that takes place. I understand it might have already, but
Yes.
we'll clarify over lunch.
Thank you.
So to understand the context in which this occurred, Ms. Williams, you made reference to the Telmar system, which relates to media buying. Can you tell us a bit more about how that system works?
Chairperson, can I have some water? I think my throat. Chairperson, I indicated earlier that when we agreed with National Treasury that we would like to bring it in-house, there was an acknowledgement that we can use a delegation 16.A64, which essentially it's a delegation that is given to departments if it's something that is beyond your control, which you need to do. However, the issue there is that you can use it, but you must write a motivation why you think this medium is the correct one, whether is it cost effective, and whether it will get to those audiences that you want. Now, our understanding is that the Telma was assisting us to do that. We would get a briefing from the client, load that briefing into the system, and the system would then say this is the most cost-effective and effective in terms of the audience that you want. And the media buying people had to write that down and submit it to us. Now, in the case of the TNA, we battled with how do you load that, and that's when and I should say, Chair, that it became, the supplier chain became aware of it after one of the submissions said TNA breakfast. They immediately raised an alarm to say, what exactly is this? And that's when the issue, because it was saying TNA breakfast and the Telma would not actually respond to something like that. It's either it's a print or broadcasting. So they had to then deal with it from that perspective. It was not fitting into the procedure that was agreed upon with National Treasury, because remember, that's what we were trying to do whilst we're trying to develop a process, a procedure that will fit the media buying system.
And so just to clarify, supply chain management received the recommendation from media buying, as I understand your testimony, that included the TNA SABC breakfast. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what was supply chain management's response to receiving that proposal from media buying?
Chairperson, they declined it, and they said that it doesn't fit into our understanding of media buying, and they sent it back. It's at that point when the media buying people then raised it with the CFO, who is an overall head of that section. And that's when she wrote to them to say, why are you refusing? Because this is media buying and you are not experts. This fits in and this is addressing the audience. And the supply chain were saying, how? You need to assist us. What is unique about it? Because a media briefing, anybody can pitch. And they were not even saying they're not going to do it. They were saying, let's do it properly and allow the other media houses that want to do it to also pitch, because basically that's what it was, that it can be a unique service because you need to prove that it is a unique. And they were arguing that it's not unique. Allow other media houses that want to pitch, and that's where the dispute was all about.
And what was the response from the CFO?
The CFO said, you are getting ahead of yourself. You have to do it, and people are getting irritated with your rigidity in this organization, and I think he himself is getting impatient with them, and they have to do it.
Chair, there will be evidence in the course of next week in relation to the payments that went from GCIS, in particular to TNA Media and Infinity. There will be a representative from National Treasury who will address that for the Commission, but in anticipation of that, I can record for the Chair at the moment that between the period 2011 and 2018, 55 million rands were paid from GCIS to TNA Media and Infinity. That will be clarified by our witness next week.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Williams, if we can then proceed at page 5. We've dealt with the question of this bullying by the CFO against the processes that the supply chain management section of GCIS were trying to hold faithful to. And we move from that to paragraph 18, where in the chronology you are dealing with Mr. Manyi's exit from GCIS, which you record at paragraph 18 happened in August 2012. Can you confirm that?
Yes, Chairperson, I can confirm that.
And what happened after his departure? What position did you then hold?
Chairperson, after Mr. Manyi left, the then Minister Chabane appointed me to be the acting Director General of the GCIS.
Ms. Williams, for how long did you occupy that position as acting DG from August 2012?
Chairperson, I've been acting acting DG from 2012, 13, and 14, ending October 2014.
Thank you. In relation to that period of acting, you say...
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. Did you say ending October 2014 or 2015?
14.
14, okay, thank you.
Ms. Williams, if we can just go to paragraph 18. Your second line there in relation to this lengthy period of acting states, my acting role was renewed every 6 months. And on the third renewal, Minister Chabane raised a question with you. Can you tell the Chair about that?
Yes, Chairperson. On the third renewal, I think the first 6 months you renewed it to the second 6 months. On the third one, he then said to me, Phumla, what will happen if I just go ahead and appoint you and confirm you? And I indicated that it would be irregular. Why doesn't he follow the process and advertise? And I mean, I can apply and like the process should be fair. And he said to me he has been told not to appoint me.
Do you know more about that instruction?
Unfortunately, Chairperson, he didn't tell me who. She just simply said, I have been told not to appoint you.
Ms. Williams, you then move in paragraph 19 to what happened after the general election in May 2014. And you make the point there that Ms. Faith Matambi was appointed as minister responsible for GCIS. And you thereafter make reference to the proclamation by the President that facilitated that. I'd like to take you to that proclamation for your confirmation. It's at page 235. You'll see the proclamation begins at page 235, and you'll see that it records that it is in terms of section 97 of the Constitution that there is a transfer of the administration of various powers. And if you go over to page 242, you will see the relevant change that was made in respect of GCIS.
You said 242?
Yes.
Okay.
You'll see under paragraph 3.1, there is a heading before the table, Government Communication and Information System. And you'll see that column 1 designates what was transferred, and that is all powers and functions of the executive authority of the department. And you'll see that column 2 references from whence it was transferred, and then column 3 to whom it was transferred. Can you read for us from where it went and to whom it went?
It moved from the minister in the presidency to the Minister of Communication.
And who was the Minister of Communications after the general election in May 2014?
It was Minister Faith Matambi.
If we can then return to page 5 of your statement.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. All along, the minister responsible for GCIS was the minister in the presidency, is that right?
That's correct.
And at this time, was Minister Faith Matambi, as Minister of Communications, minister responsible for GCIS, or was it just a question of moving some function that had belonged to GCIS and moving it away from the minister in the presidency and moving it to a minister responsible for another department?
It was moved to a new minister because it was a completely new portfolio. It moved out of the presidency and it was moved to Minister Matambi, who was new in the executive.
Yes, but what I'm trying to find out, which I might have missed earlier on, is whether the minister responsible for GCIS remained the minister in the presidency, or whether GCIS was moved to being under another minister when Minister Matambi came into the picture.
Okay. In that executive change, Minister Chabane, who was the minister in the presidency, was moved to the DPSA, and the new minister became Minister Jeff Khatebe, minister in the presidency.
Yes. Yes. And Minister Matambi was Minister of Communications.
Minister of Communication.
So is the position, therefore, that something was moved that used to be under the minister in the presidency, was moved to another minister responsible for something else? Is that correct?
The minister, Matambi, was completely a new portfolio.
Yes.
Yes. It was a combination of a number of entities. It was the GCIS, it was the Filament Publication, it was MDDA. They were belonging in different ministries, but it was all brought into one, which is the Minister of Communication.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, after that change, GCIS no longer fell under the minister in the presidency. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you. You then go on back at page 5, Ms. Williams, about what happened immediately after Ms. Matambi's appointment as Minister of Communications. And you reference there in paragraph 19 that she told you she wanted to finalize the recruitment process within GCIS for the Director General. Can you tell us about what happened after that?
Chairperson, indeed, she did confirm that I had been acting for too long. She wants to finalize, she wants to advertise the post. And indeed, I think it was hardly a week or so, I did get a call from the head of human resources indicating that they are arranging the interviews for the post, and I have been shortlisted. And I then prepared, because my understanding was that I was going to be called for the date of the interviews.
Okay.
What happened with those interviews?
Chairperson, I think in my testimony I didn't put the date, but I've since been able to locate. It was on the 17th of June, in the evening of 2014, that I received the same call from the head of HR, who indicated that, I'm sorry, Ms. Williams, the interviews have been cancelled indefinitely. There was no reason given.
Just give me that date in June 2014 again.
It was the 17th, because I was in Cape Town, 17th of June,
Yes.
2014.
Thank you.
You then reference that at the top of page 6 of your statement. And you go on at paragraph 21 to say, after these cancellations, my relationship with the minister became strained for reasons unknown to you. And you make reference then to a letter of the 18th of June 2014. I'd like to take you to that letter. It's at page 14 of the papers. In the chronology, just to confirm, this is the day after the day that your interview was cancelled. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
This is a letter addressed, if you turn to page, addressed to yourself, from at page 16, the Honourable Faith Matambi. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And can you confirm that you received this letter from the Minister?
I can confirm that I did receive it.
Please can you read into the record the first sentence of the letter?
This letter serves to bring to your attention my unhappiness with regards to the service you are providing to my office.
And if you move to page 16, the concluding part of that letter, will you also please read into the record the penultimate paragraph, which begins in various other correspondences?
The last two lines.
That whole paragraph that begins in various other correspondences.
All right. In various other correspondences I have made inputs in, it seems you have no capacity to implement changes I require or the desire to take my input seriously, a situation that has become untenable. I would want to know in writing how you intend to remedy this situation on an urgent basis in order for me to take appropriate action in this regard.
Ms. Williams, would you say it's fair that this is a letter that records a serious dissatisfaction with your performance in your work?
Chairperson, I think for me, genuinely, it was a shock because Minister Tambe was inaugurated on the 26th of May. And on the 17th, around that 2 weeks, 3 weeks, she was full of praises of my professionalism. She was so keen such that she wanted to fast track the interviewing of the post and filling the post. So on the 18th, I received a letter of an aggrieved minister complaining about unprofessionalism, complaining about things that were just completely new to me. I think I was shocked.
Well, let's go, if we can, to some of the complaints that she levelled against you in this letter, appearing at page 14. The first heading is unprofessional conduct and correspondence. She says in the first paragraph under that heading, as basic courtesy, I expect you to make time to brief me on numerous matters that relate to our work to get my portfolio going. I've found it impossible to correspond and keep in touch with you. You've chosen corresponding through memoranda, your preferred way of conducting business. She goes on and says, having said that, I've spent an inordinate amount of time correcting various memoranda sent to my office from you, including the incorrect and interchangeable use of the letterheads of the Ministry and GCIS, as well as documents that have not been cross-checked for spelling and grammatical errors, amongst others. At your level of seniority, this is an unacceptable state of affairs. Can we go back to the letterheads? What was the issue with the letterheads?
Chairperson, we were dealing with a new department, didn't exist. 3 weeks into the minister's portfolio, necessarily there would have been a change because people were still trying, we still had letterheads of GCIS. There was no way we would have thrown them away. And she had prioritized creating letterheads for herself. And the point of dispute there was that we should have moved very fast in making sure that the staff uses those letterheads. And that's what the point of her unhappiness and is that I was not using letterheads that she prefers.
Thank you. If we can then go to her second complaint on page 15 under the heading 2, improper and inconsistent salutation in letters. The minister records there, please familiarize yourself with how a minister ought to be addressed in both internal and external memoranda, and apply this consistently in all letters addressed to me in future. It is clear to me that you delegate this task to junior staff, resulting in you signing off and passing on purely structured memoranda to my office. Well, let's talk about the salutation. What was Minister Matambi concerned about in relation to how she was addressed?
Chairperson, the issue Minister Matambi wanted to be addressed as honorable. Honorable Matambi addressed in writing, Honorable Matambi, and any circumstances I needed to address her as Honorable Minister.
And then if we move to paragraph 3 on that page 15, there is a heading, Correspondence regarding the structuring of the Department of Communications. I don't want to go through, it's quite a lengthy section over the page to 15, but I'd like to pick up one particular complaint that she makes there, because we will soon move to your response to these concerns raised by the minister. At paragraph 3.2, the minister refers to a specific instruction that was given to you, and I quote, I have given you a specific instruction to include Mr. Gift Buthelezi, who is a DDG seconded from the erstwhile DOC. Your correspondence makes no reference to his involvement. This is a direct defiance of my instruction, giving an impression that you do not want to represent my interests in that intergovernmental interaction. Ms. Williams, can you explain what you understood that complaint to relate to?
Chairperson, Mr. Gift Buthelezi was appointed, he was working as a Deputy Director General in the previous Department of Communication. Minister Matambi wanted me to involve Mr. Gift Buthelezi in the work of GCIS with no paper trail whatsoever. And I had done what I normally know is done in terms of governance. I had written to the Director General of the DOC requesting that Mr. Gift Buthelezi be transferred sent on secondment, because that's how it works. And I was still awaiting that response. That's how fast things were moving. I was still awaiting for that response, because you cannot second a person without any paper trail.
Thank you. And then if we move to your response to that letter, which you will...
I'm sorry, Ms.
Apologies,
Ms. Hofmeyer. At this stage of this letter from the minister, you were still acting DG for GCIS?
That's correct, Chair.
And that made you acting DG of Ms. Matambi's department?
That's correct, Chair.
And as acting DG, you were the accounting officer. Is that right or not?
That's correct.
And if anything went wrong, you would have to account?
Certainly, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If we then move to page 17, which is the first page of your response to Ms. Matambi's letter. You will, if you move to page 19, you will see that that was dated the 23rd of June, 2014. Can you confirm that that was the letter you sent on that day?
That's correct, Chair.
I'd like to take you back to page 17. And I'd like to ask that you read into the record the second paragraph of that letter. That begins, I should start.
Okay.
Well, before the witness starts, I just note that in this letter, she did address her as honorable.
Yes. Chair, you'll see there's an explanation for that in the letter.
Thank you.
Okay. I should start by indicating that I was shocked when I read the letter, given that you have always been commending us on the support we were giving to your office. Also, it has always been my belief that from the time you were sworn in on the 26th of May, 2014, my office, together with the whole staff of GCIS, has sought to make your coming into your office as comfortable as possible. In fact, I can go so as far as to say both yourself and the Deputy Minister were our #1 priority.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And then if we move to your response to the allegation of unprofessional conduct and correspondence. Rather than read your response, can you tell us what you said in relation to the charge that you were using the wrong letterheads as evidence of unprofessional conduct?
Chairperson, I think what I responded to is that there was never any intention of undermining the fact that she wants to use her own letterheads. And I go on to explain that we have made arrangements that her office is able to give us those letterheads, and I've subsequently told the whole staff, because some of the correspondence generally comes from different sections, and I've alerted them that they need to use the letterheads that the minister would prefer.
You also addressed the question of grammatical errors in your correspondence. You will see that in the last paragraph after the heading #1. Feel free to refresh your memory about what your response was there, but could you summarize for the chair what you said in relation to the allegations of typographical and other errors in your correspondence?
I'm trying to look for that paragraph.
It's just before the bold paragraph 2, and if it's convenient, you can just read that paragraph into the record. I will follow up with my office. It begins.
Okay. I then address that and I say, I will follow up with my office and yours to manage and better coordinate the dates in the correspondence sent to your office. In the attached sample correspondence in the letter, I could not find any circled grammatical mistake. I therefore assume it might have been in other documents. I will continue, as I always try, to quality control my language.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. You then address under the heading 2 on that page the improper and inconsistent salutations in letters. Ms. Williams, what did you say in response to Ms. Matambi in relation to that allegation that you were using the incorrect salutation?
Should I read or should I just say?
Whatever is preferable to you.
Chairperson, Minister Tambe is correct that she did say she wants to be addressed as honorable. And I took the trouble to check what the protocol was from the Presidency. I was then assured that ministers cannot expect to be called honorable if they are outside of Parliament. That terminology is only used when they are inside Parliament. So there was nothing wrong that I was doing to address her as Minister Tambe.
Thank you. And then if you go over the page to 18, just to follow up on the point made by the chair in relation to how you addressed the letter, you will see you record before paragraph 3 the undertaking that, and I quote, "In the meantime, we will adhere to your request in respect of your salutation." Does that explain why you addressed the letter to the Honourable Minister Matambi?
Yes, yes, Chairperson, that's the reason.
Thank you. And then under 3, you deal with the questions of the communication with the Minister, and you particularly deal with the question of Mr. Buthelezi. And you've already given us, in anticipation of your response, what the essence of your reply to the Minister was in relation to that question. If you go to 3.4 on page 18, you will see that you reference the fact that you wrote a letter to the Department of Communication, now referred to as the Department of Communication and Postal Services, to request his secondment. You did that on the 4th of June 2014, and then you record what you've already indicated to the chair, is that you could not continue the involvement of Gift Buthelezi pending the approval from his department. Should I have formally involved him in the work of the department without the formal letter from his department, it would have constituted an irregularity by his department. Is that consistent with what you indicated to the chair earlier was your response?
That's correct, Chairperson.
And Ms. Williams, I'd like you finally to go to the conclusion of this letter. And if you go over the page to page 19, you will say in the first paragraph of that page, for the benefit of the record, I'll read it in. You say, and I quote, "I may make mistakes in my journey, but I want you to be assured that there is no disrespect on my part. It is in my interest to ensure you manage a clean administration, as necessarily it becomes a clean and effective government to serve our people." Ms. Williams, why did you emphasize the need for a clean administration to Minister Matambi?
Chairperson, I had to put that paragraph for a simple reason that Minister wanted me to do an illegal thing. You can't take an official from another department without any paperwork. And I had to remind the Minister that it is my job as an accounting officer to make sure that we run a clean administration.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. If we can then return to your statement. Before we do so, can I just ask, you reference a clean administration in relation to serving our people. What do you see as that link?
Chairperson, I want to believe when we are public servants and public representatives, we are not here in our personal capacity. We are here to serve the people of South Africa. And that is why I had to remind the Minister that we are not here in our personal capacity. We are here to serve the people of South Africa.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. If we then go back to page 6 of your statement, we were at paragraph 21, where you reference the shock that you experienced when you received this letter of the 18th of June, a matter of weeks after Minister Matambi took up her position. And then in paragraph 22, you reference an approach to the President arising from this interaction with Minister Matambi. Can you please tell the Chair about that interaction?
Chairperson, I think I should indicate that after that letter, the behavior of Minister Matambi got worse. I then took the liberty of contacting the President to request that he intervenes on my behalf, because for the life of me, I couldn't understand what is it that is wrong that I'd done. And yes, with fairness, he gave me an opportunity to talk to him. And I explained, and I remember even mentioning the issue of the Honorable, that it's not a matter that warrants a person to be charged and given a letter. And I remember him laughing about it himself. And he then said, no, Ntomkhulu, I will attend to it. And that's how we left, and I left with real confidence that the President is going to address the matter.
And when did that meeting occur?
Chairperson, I may not know the date, but I do remember that in one of the cabinet meetings, because I was still attending, I went to him and I said, I'd like to meet. And I remember getting a call to say, yes, the President says you can come. And I went to Mahlamba-Ndlovu to go and meet with the President. And I don't remember the date, but I know that I did meet the President at his official guest house.
Even if you can't remember the exact date, was it a matter of months after the letter, weeks after the letter? Remember, the letter you received was on the 18th of June 2014. Your response was on the 23rd of June 2014. Can you just give us a sense of the amount of time thereafter that you raised it with the President?
Chairperson, to be honest, I raised it almost immediately. However, I think I was called probably 3 weeks or 4 weeks later. I think it must have been around July, but I did raise it personally with him in one of the cabinet meetings. But I think the exact call to say come, I think it must have been around July.
And Ms. Williams, if we then go to paragraph 23 on page 6, that paragraph begins with the following, and I quote, "By October 2014, the relations had got to a point where I received another letter informing me of the withdrawal of my acting responsibility." Please can you tell the Chair how you were informed of the withdrawal of your acting position?
Chairperson, from June, I should say, up till October, the situation had got so bad that Minister Matambi was interacting with the staff directly without even involving me. And I had already become quite stressed about it. I then requested to take leave, which was on the 6th of October. And I then applied to take leave. In my application, I attached the proposed person to act whilst I was away, which was Mr. Kitumetse Semakane, who was the most senior in the organization. In fact, even myself, I joined GCIS, I found him there. She was the most senior chief director, and she was acting DDG in my position. I then attached that proposed acting person. She approved it, and I left. And yeah, and when I left, she then started making changes and removing the person that I had proposed, and she then appointed Mr. Donald Dipoko as the acting Director General of GCIS, who was the Chief Director in the department.
I'd like to go back for a moment to your leave, but you've referenced Mr. Lipoko. So it's pertinent for me to ask, how did Mr. Lipoko come to GCIS originally?
Chairperson, I did indicate that Mr. Lipoko was headhunted by Mr. Manyi. When he came in GCIS, he was brought in as a media buyer. As I recall, she was from the private sector in the media buying space. So it made sense for us to get somebody who has an experience in that area. So she was brought in as a media buyer, and she was a chief director of media buying.
And I made reference earlier to the hierarchy within the system of GCIS. Can you confirm at that time, as you reference at paragraph 23, that when Mr. Lepoko was appointed as acting Director General, notwithstanding your recommendation that that position be given to Mr. Semakani, who was the Deputy Director General at the time, he held the position of Chief Director, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And Chief Director of Media Buying?
Media Buying, yes.
And that jump from Chief Director to Acting Director General, is that usual?
Chairperson, also my understanding is that when they are Deputy Directors General, the normal thing from a DG is to appoint amongst the 3 DDGs, because at that time there were 3 DDGs, Mr. Nebula Huabe, Mr. Harold Maloka, and myself. But at that time, in my position, Mr. Skitu Makane was acting. So it was really unusual that the 3 DDGs were overlooked and they went to take the new person who was not part of the institution. So it was unusual.
Thank you. I said I would return to your leave. How were you notified of this demotion from your position as acting DG when you were on holiday?
Chairperson, I remember getting a letter which was dated the 18th. Remember, Chair, I was on leave up until the 26th, 27th of October. The letter was sent to me, which I even saw when I was at home, because they managed to get it scanned and sent, but I was at home.
Thank you. Let us go to that letter if we may. It's at page 20 of the bundle. Can you confirm that this is the letter that you received from Minister Matambi on the 17th of October 2014?
That's correct, Chair.
I'd like us to turn over the page to page 21. The second paragraph records, and I quote, "You are also aware that with the abolishment of the GCIS and in line with the proclamation," just to pause there, what proclamation is that?
I think she was referring to the proclamation that was signed by the President of creating the new department.
She goes on and she says, "The position of Deputy Chief Executive Officer of GCIS now becomes Deputy Director General for the new Department of Communications." And then she goes on in the second paragraph thereafter to say, and I quote, "In line with the proclamation, you are hereby informed to revert to your position as the Deputy Director General Corporate Services with effect from the 17th of October 2014. Ms. Williams, what does that mean? In line with the proclamation, you must be demoted.
Chairperson, it may sound funny, but that's how painful it was. You are on leave and you come back and you find your salary has been adjusted. You are then told you are owing, I remember it was 35,000 that had been paid to you whilst you are on leave, and you have to pay it back. One would have expected that there should have been a bit of discussion, especially because the proclamation was a process, and I had to painfully look for that 35,000.
Ms. Williams, can I just understand though, did the proclamation say anything about your demotion?
Chairperson, the proclamation, as I understand it, there was no indication that it has to start almost like now. And as I know the proclamations as they work, there has to be a process because there's a lot that has been put in place. There's a question of the assets of the department. There's a question of the budget that has been voted for by the Treasury. You certainly cannot just midstream deal with abolishing the budget. is appropriated through Parliament. You can't deal with, in the midstream, deal with the issues of changing assets. There has to be some kind of a transition. And as I know, generally in government there's transition. There was absolutely no basis whatsoever for Minister Tambe to do that.
Sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. I see that this letter from Minister Tambe was dated 17 October 2014 on the front page, and that she also signed it on the same date. And earlier on, your attention was drawn to the fact that it was saying that this change in your status in the department was happening with immediate effect. When did you get the letter? Did you get it on the same day? Did you get it a few days later? Or?
Chairperson, as I indicated, that I was on leave. And the payday in government, at least, is on the 15th. I was on leave, and obviously my salary had gone through. And that's why it went through, because the understanding was that I'm still the acting Director General. And I found myself, when I came back on the 27th, with salaries saying I must pay back 35,000 rand, because it has been paid erroneously, because they had not seen the letter of Minister Tambe. They hadn't even had a decency to send it to salaries. It was just scanned and sent to me.
But when did you receive it?
I can't remember the date, because the only thing that I can confirm, Chair, is that I remember that I think it was on the 18th or 19th, I did respond and acknowledge receipt, which I think I hadn't, but I acknowledged receipt, but I also responded to the last paragraph, Chair.
Oh. And the demotion that we are talking about here is that of being removed from the position of acting DG of the department.
Certainly.
Yes, but before that acting appointment, you were at the level of Deputy Director General.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify on that date issue, if you go over the page to page 22, Ms. Williams, that, as I understand it, is your response to Minister Tambe dated the 18th of October 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to go back to page 21, and you'll forgive my incredulity. I was posing with you the explanation that Minister Tambe gives for removing you from the position of acting Director General. You'll recall that in the second paragraph on that page, she references the proclamation and she explains, in fairness to her, consistent with that proclamation, that pursuant to the proclamation, and I'm paraphrasing now, but I'd like your confirmation as to whether you agree with the paraphrase, what had previously been the position of Deputy Chief Executive Officer of GCIS was now becoming Deputy Director General for the new Communication Department. Is that right?
Chairperson, the Deputy CEO in GCIS was the Deputy Director General. The only reference that she's making here is that you are no longer the Deputy Director General of GCIS. You are now the Deputy Director General of the new department.
And the person who replaced you, springboarding from the position of Chief Director to now your superior as Acting Director General, was Mr. Lepoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
I'd like then to go to the last paragraph of that letter. And before we do so, I'd like you to explain for the benefit of the Chair what the role of Cabinet spokesperson was insofar as the Director General position within GCIS was concerned.
Chairperson, the position of the Director General of GCIS includes being a cabinet spokesperson. And that's how it has been from its early days up till now. It's still that.
But you'll see in paragraph, on page 21 in the last paragraph, Minister Matambi proposes a variation of that consistent position. Can you explain for the Chair's benefit what she was proposing in that last paragraph?
Chairperson, I have no idea what Minister Matambi was having in mind, because my understanding, we've always been a department that leads cabinet decision. Minister in the Presidency has never been a spokesperson. It may be reading the statement, but he has never been a spokesperson of the, and which is what I was trying to point out to her, that the minister in the Presidency is not the spokesperson. He's a minister responsible for the GCIS, but the DG of GCIS is expected to communicate the decisions of cabinet.
To be clear, Ms. Williams, as I understand the last paragraph of page 21, and you'll confirm if this is an accurate description, what Minister Matambi was in essence saying was that you would no longer hold the role of acting Director General, you would revert to your position as Deputy Director General, but that you would continue to provide support to the Minister in the Presidency on a secondment basis as Cabinet spokesperson. Is that accurate?
That's what she was suggesting.
And what was your attitude to that?
Chairperson, I've been consistent in saying that what I did for cabinet, I did it as an acting Director General of the GCIS. It was therefore not correct that you could second a job that resides in that department. It was completely incorrect.
And if we can go to page 22, because that is your response to Minister Matambi, where you take up this issue. And if I may just direct you to the last sentence of the penultimate paragraph on that page, you'll see there, and I quote, "You've raised this issue with her in the preceding parts," and then you say, "As such, the newly appointed acting Director General, by virtue of holding that office, automatically becomes the government and cabinet spokesperson." And then you go on and record, "In view of the above and in line with your directive that I revert back to my substantive position as Deputy Director General, I will not be able to provide support to the Minister in the Presidency on a secondment basis because my position is a full-time position, which entails the governance oversight which require my full attention." Can you confirm that Minister Matambi received this letter?
I certainly delivered it in her office.
And as I read your response there, it was in effect a refusal to take up that position because you were now going to be consumed with your Deputy Director functions. Is that accurate?
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you. If we can then return to page 7 of your statement. Your statement has now progressed to February 2015. So just to orientate ourselves in time, your demotion occurs in October of 2014. Minister Matambi requests that despite the fact that you are now only going to be Deputy Director General, you should continue as Cabinet spokesperson, and you've refused that. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
So what happens, if you can elucidate for the Chair, in February 2015?
Chairperson, in February 2015, I then received a phone call from the Secretary, Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Lubisi, and he was asking where I was, because on that day it was Cabinet Lekgotla, and he asked me where I was, and I said, no, I'm on my way to the office, because it was in the morning. And he said that, no, you are expected to be here in Cabinet. And I had to remind him that I have been removed, and Mr. Dipoko is the one who's supposed to to be joining the cabinet as the acting Director General. And he insisted that it should be me, I should come. I then insisted that it should be put in writing because I was not going to do it.
And can I then refer you to page 24? Is this the writing, so to speak, that you demanded be provided?
That's correct, Chair.
And can you tell us what pages 24 and 25 contain, insofar as your request for a written delegation of this responsibility to yourself?
Chairperson, this was the letter that appoints me to be the acting cabinet spokesperson with all the functions that relate to cabinet, sitting in cabinet committees, sitting in cabinet, drafting the statement of cabinet, and also speaking on the issues of the cabinet. So that's the letter I received.
Why were you concerned to get this letter?
Chairperson, I'm a governance person. It wouldn't have made sense to be told verbally that I must go and execute a job that cannot be tracked. So I insisted that it has to be given to me in writing in the same way that I was given in writing in October that I must revert back to my job.
Ms. Williams, may I suggest that your fidelity to governance went further? Because if you turn over to page 26, you will there see an agreement that was prepared between you and Minister Radebe, who, as I understand it, was Minister in the Presidency at the time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it relates to your, in brackets under your name on that page, acting cabinet spokesperson position. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Who drew up this agreement?
Chairperson, I should indicate that after I had received the letter from Minister Tambe, I wrote an acceptance and I drew her attention that I would request that she appoint somebody in my position so that I can be able to focus on this job. And I then subsequently drafted the performance agreement, also in consultation with herself. I then tried to establish where the lines of authority, because I think that whole period was really confusing. The cabinet work and the GCIS, the new ministry. She then suggested that because I will not be doing cabinet, I suggest we do a performance agreement that will be signed by the two of us, the minister in the Presidency and herself. And I need to also remind the Commission that at that point, which was 2015, they had already reversed the abolishing of GCIS, which was in November 2014. So she then suggested that the performance agreement will have to be signed by two people, that's herself and the minister in the Presidency.
If I can take you to page 30, just to confirm those two signatories to your performance agreement. Can you please identify for the Chair who signed your performance agreement as acting cabinet spokesperson?
It was Minister Jeffrey Radebe, and it was also signed by Minister Faith Matambi.
Thank you. If we return to page 7 of your statement, Ms. Williams. At paragraph 26 on that page, you commence with the following. You say the Public Service Regulations prescribes that when a public servant acts on a higher portfolio that is funded and vacant, she or he needs to be compensated after 6 weeks. Can you explain for us what the relevance of that is to you now taking up the acting cabinet spokesperson position when your official title prior to that was Deputy Director General?
Chairperson, my position as a DDG was at level 15. Cabinet spokesperson is at level 16, which is a Director General. And necessarily, when you are acting in that position, the Public Service Regulation stipulates that if you have worked for 6 weeks, you are then entitled to be paid that difference of the acting role in a senior position.
And what did Minister Matambi say to your request that you be paid at the level 16 level because you had assumed that position?
Chairperson, she refused and said that I was helping and therefore I don't deserve to be paid.
And what did you do in response?
Chairperson, I escalated the matter to the HR and the HR that wrote to her. She insisted that she will not pay me. I escalated the matter to the DPSA, who also agreed with me, but obviously they didn't want to write it. I then escalated the matter to the Public Service Commission.
I'd like to take you to the ruling that you received from the Public Service Commission. You'll find it at page 45. You'll see that page 45 is what looks like the covering letter to their report. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And it was received on the dated the 1st of February 2016. Can you confirm when you received it?
That's the date I received it, Chair.
It is a fairly lengthy document, and I don't propose to deal with all of its contents. I'd like to take you just to certain pertinent aspects of it. If you go to page 47, Ms. Williams, before we deal with what's at page 47, can you just summarize for us what the nature of your complaint was to the Public Service Commission that resulted in this ruling?
Chairperson, my grievance was them to intervene that I be compensated because it is my basic right in terms of the labor relations, and which I felt that Minister Tambe was violating, and I was requesting the Public Service Commission to investigate and provide guidance.
Thank you. At page 47, in this section of the ruling, the Public Service Commission is really recording the various correspondence that it has seen and which it received in dealing with your grievance. And you'll see at paragraph 8 on that page, they deal there with the appointment of Mr. Lepoko as Acting Director General from the point of 1st April 2015, and that is a reference to his replacement of your occupying that position. If you go to the final paragraph under 8 before the new paragraph starts, number 9, the Public Service Commission makes a comment that the reference in that letter to section, this is the letter that Minister Matambi wrote in relation to Mr. Lepoko's elevation. The Public Service Commission, as I read it there, says that the referral to section 42 of the Act is incorrect. They say that it's a section 32 matter. And then they go on, and if I may ask you just to read into the record what is recorded there from the second sentence, which starts, "It should."
It should be noted that there are 3 positions of the Deputy Director General in the GCIS, but none of them was appointed to act as a Director General, which created a lot of challenges in terms of executing duties, in that a Chief Director would be appointed to act in Mr. Lepoko's position, while he will have to double up and perform the functions of the Deputy Director General Corporate Services, over and above the functions of the Director General.
Thank you. And then if you'll read the next sentence as well.
The appointment of Mr. Dipoko further created challenges in the reporting lines, as the Deputy Director Generals in the GCIS now had to report to the Chief Director.
And then the next sentence.
Potential instability and dissatisfaction amongst the members of the senior management service is created through this arrangement. The arrangement also creates challenges in that a person appointed to act in the post of the Chief Director could not be paid an acting allowance because the position is not vacant. If paid, the payment would have been irregular.
Ms. Williams, this is the recordal of the Public Service Commission. Does it accord with your sense of the disruption that occurred at the time pursuant to Mr. Lipoko's appointment?
Certainly, Chairperson.
What was it like in GCIS after he was elevated over the 3 DDGs to the position of Acting Director General? You were moved back down to Deputy Director General. Can you give us a sense of how management in GCIS was operating?
Chairperson, I think the situation got quite bad in the GCIS. You will note in the process of the madness that was existing at the time, we lost 2 of the Deputy Directors General, Mr. Harold Maluka, whom Donald was reporting under. We had Ms. Nibu Lehwabe, who was a Deputy Director General, left, and there was general despondency in the organization, and as such that some people, we lost quite good people because of the situation that was existing at the time.
Thank you. And then I'd like to ask you to go to page 52, which is further into the ruling of the Public Service Commission. Ms. Williams, you made a reference earlier in your testimony to the reversal of the proclamation that was gazetted in July of 2014. And I'd like to direct you to the 3rd bullet on page 52, because there the Public Service Commission makes reference to that reversal. I'd like to read to you what they record there and then you to explain your understanding of that reversal. Midway through that bullet point, the Public Service Commission records the following. The President reversed the decision in November 2014 and re-established the GCIS in its original form. Minister Matambi was also advised by the DPSA to advertise the post of DG and Cabinet spokesperson. Can you explain to us what happened in November 2014?
We were advised that the Presidency has reversed the decision and re-established the GCIS as it was. And subsequently, there was a correspondence that came from the DPSA, because the DPSA, I should say that they were coordinating this whole transition, and there was a correspondence to that effect and the instruction to the Minister Tambe to act on a decision and advertise the post. And if I recall, they even gave a deadline that by the 1st of April 2014, the post should have been filled.
Would that have been April 2014 or 2015?
15.
Thank you. What happened? Did Minister Matambi advertise and then fill the post?
What I remember, Chairperson, is that the post was advertised, but nothing happened.
Who remained in the position?
Mr. Dipoko remained in the position.
And for how long did he remain in the position?
Mr. Dipoko has been in that position until 2017, April.
And what changed in April 2017?
In 2017, there was change of guard, and we got a new minister, Minister Ayanda Dlodlo.
And who did Minister Ayanda Dlodlo appoint in that position?
She then appointed me on the 8th of May 2017 and appointed me to be the acting Director General of GCIS.
So just for clarification, despite this instruction from the DPSA that the position of DG be advertised, and that the position of Cabinet spokesperson be advertised and filled in November 2014. Am I correct that that did not take place and Minister Lepoko occupied that position consistently from the end of 2014 until you replaced him in May of 2017?
Certainly, Chairperson, because I think Mr. Lepoko was appointed, if you recall the letter, was that she was appointed because there's a new DG, there's a new department. However, it was then reversed, but she continued to be the acting DG now of GCIS. Back to, yeah.
I'd then like to take you to paragraph 21 on that page 52. You will see that the Public Service Commission there records that it should be mentioned, and I quote, that several attempts to obtain a response from the Minister of Communications and to meet with her were unsuccessful. Ms. Williams, can you tell us, do you know, did Ms. Williams participate in this, did Minister Matambi participate in this process at all?
Chairperson, what I do know is that they did struggle to get her response. And at some point, the Public Service Commission was of the view that they are guided by their own procedures. If Minister Tambe is not responding, they will proceed and finalize the report. And I know that at some point, he finally gave them an appointment.
Ms. Williams, if I could take you to page 58, because I'd like your comment on my sense from reading this ruling that the Public Service Commission was concerned by Minister Matambi's failure to respond at all in the process. If you look at the first paragraph on that page, almost half of the way down, this is in the concluding section of the PSC's ruling. They record, and I quote, "The failure by the Minister to respond to the Public Service Commission is in contravention of section 196(3) of the Constitution. The Public Service Commission, therefore, has no alternative but to report the Minister's failure to cooperate with the Commission to the relevant delegated authority in the Presidency." Do you regard it as accurate to say they took it seriously that Minister Matambi failed to engage with them at all in the process?
I agree, Chairperson.
Do you know what happened with that report to the Presidency about her breach of section 1963 of the Constitution?
My understanding is that nothing was done because, Chairperson, even the ruling that I should be compensated my acting, she never implemented it. So I don't think she was ever reprimanded. Safe to say that I also made another attempt of engaging the President on this report.
Indeed, and we will deal with that in your further testimony. Chair, I see that we are just before 1, and I'm aware that there might need to be arrangements made for the continuation of Ms. Williams' evidence, given the need to see the experts' evidence this afternoon. May I hand over to my learned friend, Mr. Pretorius, about those arrangements?
Maybe before you do that, let me just ask one question to Ms. Williams, because I don't want to forget it. Did you sense that for some reason there was some reluctance in making Mr. Is it called Lepoko or Tipoko? Dipoko, spokesperson, government spokesperson? I'm asking that because I think what I understood from your evidence and Mr. Masego's evidence is that Mr. Masego, in his position as DG of GCIS, was government spokesperson, and that Mr. Nechitenze had also been government spokesperson in the position of DG of GCIS. When you were acting as DG of GCIS, you were also acting spokesperson for government, and now there was a new acting DG for this communications department, but he was not being made acting government spokesperson as well, but they wanted you to be acting government spokesperson. Do you know why he wouldn't have been made acting government person, Mr. Dipoko?
Chairperson, I wouldn't know all except that the Cabinet Secretary called me and insisted that they want me. And my view was that it's the Minister who can instruct me. And he assured me that they've told the Minister that they want me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, you may hand over to Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. May I address you on one matter before we talk about the change in the program this afternoon, or the slight change in the program? You gave instructions earlier that the matter raised shortly after the short adjournment be investigated.
Yes.
I've spoken to one of the Commission's investigators. The several communications of Mr. Manya to an official or officials of the Commission will be collated and provided to you in due course.
Okay.
With regard to communications to the witness during the course of her testimony, these will be preserved and also provided to you. But may we draw your attention to Regulation 12.1
Yes.
and Regulation 10.6. Regulation 12.1 makes it clear that it is an offence to prejudice the inquiry or its proceedings.
Yes.
And Regulation 10.6, as you will know, Chair, entitles you or empowers you to call people to appear before you.
Yes.
So to the extent that you may find after investigation that it is appropriate to do so, you may consider summonsing Mr. Manya to appear before you to explain such conduct as you might find either unlawful or appropriate, possibly unlawful or appropriate.
Yes.
For the legal team's part, Chair, we think it is, or we believe it is, very important to take every step to protect witnesses who come to testify and to ensure that they feel free to do so without fear.
Yes, yes. Maybe I should just say something about that. I would ask the legal team to prepare documentation for me that would enable me to take a decision on this or authorize the taking of some action, whether it's summoning Mr. Manyi or whatever, documentation that will include the text message that was sent, because obviously I haven't seen it, so that in due course then a decision can be made. You are right that the protection of witnesses who come before this commission is very important. I have on a number of occasions called upon members of the public and people within government service, including ministers, members of the executive in general, and former directors general, to please come forward if they've got information that is relevant to what the commission is investigating. And if those who heed this call are going to be intimidated or interfered with, I think the commission needs to look into that very seriously. So, so I would request the legal team to, in due course, prepare some documentation that would place before me all information that I may need in order to make a decision.
We will do so, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
In relation to this afternoon's proceedings, the video conference has been brought forward to 2:30. It is necessary to set up the communication protocol and equipment. And for that reason, may we adjourn now and then resume at 2:30.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Ms. Williams, we are going to adjourn now. We are not going to be able to continue with your evidence this afternoon. You have not finished giving evidence. That is simply because there is an arrangement that had been made for certain expert witnesses to give evidence via video link this afternoon. We will adjourn, and you must please come back on Monday at 10 o'clock, when we will then try and finish with your evidence. Is that all right with you?
It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pretorius, did you want to remind me about the other announcement?
Yes, I was
Yes,
intending
okay.
to do so.
Okay, thank you. With regard to Monday, I just want to confirm that all counsel or lawyers who saw me earlier this week here in my temporary chambers about applications that have been submitted for permission to cross-examine witnesses, that is, applications from or by implicated persons. I arranged with them that they should be back here on Monday morning, so that at that stage I could give directions as to what should happen to those applications and when those applications would be heard. So I'm repeating this so that everybody is reminded that that is what will happen on Monday. So those counsel or lawyers representing those parties should be here in the morning on Monday. We will then adjourn until 2:30 for the hearing of the evidence of expert witnesses. We adjourn.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, go. Criselda here, Criselda here. Criselda here. Stopping. Asibonakala esi situlo ne? Oh, okay. Can't flip it. Asibonakala i-headphones am.